Hello. I always like to end it on Guile's theme when we do Street Fighter.
Ah, okay. That's a nice touch, yeah.
Yeah. There's a thing way back, and it was Guile's theme goes with everything. And people would uh, clip a video with Guile's theme over it and see if Guile's theme sort of suited that video. And it always did. Um,
Hmm.
so, yeah.
Can you go to the first slide, by the way?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
We got to see if this works.
it won't. Uh,
I at least see the first slide.
okay, let's have a look here.
Yeah, but you're right. It won't work.
Is that? uh, I don't know how much delay is appropriate.
No, I don't think it's working.
You don't think it's working? Okay, I do. I'm right.
It's okay. This has become our ritual for every episode.
It registers that I've turned my camera off, but it doesn't register the changes of the thing.
So while we wait, do we want to address some things that came up last week
Right.
after we finished recording?
Yeah. Can you?
Yeah.
Do you want to read it out?
Yeah. Do you want to get to the comment first on economics or the other thing that Covert Cavalry brought up in the Discord?
Um, I don't know what's his name? Covert
Okay.
Cavalry.
Covert. Yeah.
Covert.
Well, it was just a interesting little note that he made about. He gave an example. Let me zoom this thing in. He was talking about the pluralist economy and how, in the U.S., we've essentially adopted Italian fascism as our economic model. As an example, the airlines in America right now are planning to go on strike, but need to go to a mediation board set up by the federal government to arbitrate the needs of labor and employer.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting tidbit about unions and how seemingly unions seem to be for the workers, but ultimately unions force state intervention into these negotiations.
Well,
So it's a way of actually the state kind of sneaking their
there's also
long arm into everything.
there's also something performative about it, which is this like desire for us to think that like the state is doing something about it, especially for my a piece. Some of my notes had flown off. You know, well, what Quigley would say is, in that situation, it's a pantomime. Because what's actually happening there is who's getting screwed. Well, really, at the end of the day, it's not the unions, it's not the airlines, it'll be you, ultimately. It'll be that this unions and capital cooperate very happily, really. Capital likes having unions at a deep level. I'm not talking about like what the average like manager of a factory thinks about the unions, because it standardizes the negotiating system. They can negotiate with national bodies, and they sit down in a room, and the union guys know like these aren't really union guys. These are not like Bob the shop foreman, right? Like that's not who it is. It's like some suave, Yale educated lawyer who like
Mhm.
has the
Well, every
right.
union nowadays, major union nowadays, is a dedicated bureaucracy of its own.
Right. How do I
Most people
get?
don't work in the factory.
You get one job once, and then you just climb the unions. It's
Yeah.
uh, you know, yeah. So really,
Yeah.
the what will happen over the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, if things look like anything like they did, unions will um, clash with business, but ultimately cooperate with business. And it's white collar guys who will be experience decline in standards of living. Now, it just so happens that today in 2023, and at least in the UK, a lot of people are white collar. A lot more of the proportion of people are white collar because they've moved a lot of the blue collar jobs to the third world. So, you know who is not having declining standards of living right now? It's people in the third world because business still needs them. It doesn't need us, and we're the ones who are going to be paying. And it's why ultimately I'm a protectionist. Is we need to like look after ourselves, and we need to keep some of that wealth at home. The large, big businesses don't care. Multinationals don't care. They're not allied to us. Maybe you want to say like one of the reasons why the Germans had to be beaten in the Second World War is because they didn't really have like international companies, because their international company, like their major companies, were still patriotically German, whereas America and Britain had huge companies that were like we don't really care what we're genuinely multinationals. Germany didn't have multinationals in the same way. So there's a lot there, but it's continuing today. It's an element of fascistic sort of intervention, corporatism that survives into the pluralist economy.
All right, so we'll address the other comment from last week. This
Right.
is from Mr. L. Tiger. He says, if weak currencies were good for the economy, then Japan and South America would have the best economies. You, Bucklander, have swallowed the Keynesian economic nonsense. Most Western countries are net importers, not exporters. That means a strong currency is better as long as we remain a consumption-based economy. Don't be a sheep. Don't blindly repeat what economic textbooks say.
So, first off, this is again more or less what Quigley says, and sometimes I get a bit caught up in that, but this really is more what Quigley says. The problem with that point is that a lot of these things are very complicated, in a way that I think that that point ignores. Why is South America not a powerful economy because they've got low valued currencies? Why isn't Argentina the most powerful exporting country in the world? Well, there's a lot of other things that are going on with South America that mean that it is not going to be, or really ever going to be, an industrial powerhouse. South America needs to do commodities, and it needs to do them well. It has problems with the sort of the social structures. It's been, poisoned by a lineage of, by its history, going back to the sort of the those revolutions, the Bolivarian revolutions, and the allure of communism or socialism to some extent. And on the flip side, it's had its wealth hugely concentrated into a few hands. There's no opportunity for a meaningful middle class to emerge. But if it ever does, they would be very comfortable if the globalists allow them to export commodities, if those commodities are not bad for the environment. I apologize for the sounds going off. I have some.
By the way, I do hear it now. I haven't noticed it for 9 episodes, but
What?
someone put it in the comments, and I do hear it now. What you're doing is you're hitting the table, I think, when you're trying to emphasize a point. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, apologies for that. So so South America is not going to be a industrial powerhouse. It does benefit from the ability to export commodities at with weaker currencies. That does not necessarily mean that beyond that, that's all you need. That has not translated into those things spreading throughout South America. Incidentally, I don't think this is Keynesianism. This makes a lot of sense. It's just on the face of it, it makes sense. And one of the things I'd like to say to the guy who made this point was, well, I'm very happy to read something that undermines this argument, but on the face of things, this doesn't seem Keynesian to me. It just seems like more basic than like one economic theory or another. Japan is a good one to point to. Why isn't Japan better off economically? Well, Japan's the yen tanked in the 90s, beginning of the 90s, and it has stayed pretty low since then. It hasn't recovered. It was going at about 250 yen to the dollar. Sorry. The Japan, yeah. It had 250 yen to the dollar. And then it collapsed. Well, it had a pretty good I'm just looking up the yen to U.S. Dollars exchange rate history, so I can talk about this with it in front of me. So in the mid 80s, Japan was trading at about 250 yen to the dollar, and then in the 90s, the yen increased in value compared to the dollar. The dollar could buy a lot less yen, and it hit a low of in the 90s and in 2010 financial crisis, it was down to 80 yen to the dollar. Actually, I think that lines up pretty well with what I'm saying. Japan had a really remarkable 80s. The 80s were great for Japan. And then it crashed. And they've done okay, but they have never really gotten back to the boom of the 80s. So their currency is much stronger than it was in relation to the dollar, is much stronger than it was in the 80s. So I don't really see what the how Japan works. The other thing is there's as in the book Princes of the Yen, or the documentary by Richard Werner talks about, there's a lot of messing about that's happened in with Japan's currency and central bank. It was, and as far as I can remember, it lines up as things line up, the Prince of the Yen lines up well with this time frame of the yen. So I think Werner talks about like it's the 80s and 90s that that like late 80s early 90s when Japan gets these demands put on it by, I think, like Goldman Sachs guys. Like there's this relationship that he talks about of like former Japanese finance ministry guys getting jobs with Goldman Sachs, and then like 2 years later they're lobbying for a change to how things were being done. Again, Prince of the Yen, there's a documentary about it, which is quite good. I haven't read the book, but it's a very interesting documentary, at least, and I think there's a lot in there for our guys. Have you read the book, or have you just seen the documentary, Jeff?
Yeah, I've seen the documentary.
So, it's on YouTube, I think. Go watch it. So I think it holds up. Now, there's another part to his question besides the two specific examples that he gives. He talks about we've got a strong currencies, and that's fine as long as while we stay a consumption-based, import-based economy. Well, but that's the problem, right? Like, if you go back to the evolution of civilizations and you read in there, Quigley says that what happens with the expansion of a civilization is that it eventually it starts to slow down. And what happens is you can start to look for compensation for the slowing down of growth in the form of consumption. But it's not growth. What you're doing now is you're eating into your capital. And you can also do it via inflation. Right, you can inflate away to a certain extent and print money, but that only lasts so long. And I think the second half of his point is tied up very much in this tied up with this stuff that we're this is us. Our economies are doing okay insofar as we're living off of the capital of our civilization. We're not growing. The more and more that we're consuming is not the more and more that's the basis of an increased capacity for production. It is us living off going further and further into debt. Every year we have more debt. You know, there's name a Western country that is not operating a deficit. I can't think of one. I haven't looked. I know. Good for Israel. Israel's no longer running a deficit, and that helps when the U.S. taxpayer subsidizes your economy and your government spending. So I think the premise of his question is a little bit flawed. It was a good question. I appreciated it, but I don't think that it really holds up. the ability to consume does not mean that you have the ability to consume indefinitely, and the type of consumption that he points to is not one that can continue indefinitely. And incidentally, Peter Zien is optimistic about America because it's the one Western economy that could pull up the drawbridge and produce enough for itself to consume and push its own like consumption economy if it wanted to. But that is not that's not true of the West as a whole. So there's some problems there. But if he's got something for me to read about this, I'll read it if he hears this.
Yeah, he is in chat right now, but I think we should get started with today's topic, and maybe we might return to that if he has some more follow-up questions.
Well, I can see it. The problem, one, yeah, you're getting caught up with like these absolute values. Dark of the Dark says 1 yen is literally 1 cent. That doesn't mean anything. I can create an economy right now, and I can say like, it doesn't matter what I denominate the exchange in the exchange rate. Sorry, it doesn't matter like what you call your unit of currency. What matters is like historical exchange rate values, and when we say that like the yen is, I'm trying to think of how to put this. When the yen is weak insofar as it's a small value thing compared to the dollar, sure. It is not weak in terms of the amount of yen in circulation compared to the amount of dollars in circulation, and the amount that the amount of dollars a yen can get, and vice versa. If you look at the historical trends, the yen was much stronger, much weaker in previous ages. The British had a currency of like, it was like almost $5 to the pound. That doesn't mean that the British, and this is like pre-World War One, that doesn't mean that the British were experiencing a substantially better lifestyle. In fact, they were experiencing a lower standard of living than somewhere that had different values. So what you call the currency, how the unit, and how that compares to like 1-to-1 is not valuable. You have to think a slightly more broadly about it. Yeah, they're not stronger in the way that is significant. They're superficially stronger. It's like, and people do this, like, it doesn't matter actually like what the pound is going for. It's I don't know. I see what you're saying now. I will think about how to articulate it, but it's not. But you're getting caught up on the surface level of the currency.
It's more like what the currency gets you, right, rather than the absolute numerical value.
Like you might want to say like if you look at the last post World War II, how much gold could the yen buy over time? What's the historical average that an ounce of gold costs now? And then is it lower? Is it higher? That's how you want to think about it. You gotta think a little bit more abstractly about the currency. But it's I'm annoyed at myself that I can't put it better. So I'm gonna think about how to articulate that better for maybe a future episode. But today, what we got is this is episode 10. We're doing 2 chapters, but a Bucklander lecture series. And today we're looking at the build up to the Second World War. But before we do that, just a really quick recap. Last time we saw the emergence of the military-industrial complex, which I think is, for Quigley, is one of the really useful bits of Quigley. It's sort of okay. Has it frozen again? If you can't see, yeah, it's frozen again.
Okay.
It's just random. I'm.
Hey, something happened. Okay.
Oh, my mouse has disappeared. What does it mean?
Like, Renegade is right. Without seeing a Bucklander lecture series, it just simply isn't a proper episode of Quigley.
No. Why? I can't see my mouse now, so I'm trying to. Sorry, guys. This is annoying.
Okay, now it's working.
Yeah, but now I can't see my mouse. I can't. How do I bring up? I need the presenter view so I can see. There we go. That'll do. So, yeah, there you go. A Bucklander lecture series. Is it working?
Yep. All is right in the world again.
Okay. So today is, yeah, like I said, the military-industrial complex, and I think this is that's one of the big payoffs that you get from this, from Tragedy and Hope, how that emerges, and how that is used as a result of the Great Depression, and what countries realize is that they can maintain economic activity without contributing to inflation. One of the ways that you can do that is make things that are only designed for a single user that is going to use them to destroy other users' capacity to produce. So if you want to learn more about that, check out the last episode. I think that was the most informative episode yet. So it's hung up again, hasn't it? Jeff, are you there?
Yeah, I guess it has. Or it could be. Well, you've clicked it and it hasn't flipped over, I guess. Oh, there it goes. Today, chapter 9.
I'm restarting the thing again. I have no idea what the solution to this is, guys. I apologize. I know it's not enjoyable.
In the meantime, maybe a quick plug for our Substack. I think the link is in the description. Yep. Do check it out. Right now we are about to start a series on Operation Gladio, which is a operation that takes place right after World War II, where the CIA, the director of the OSS at the time, Alan Dulles, realizes that, oh shit, maybe we were fighting the wrong enemy. We shouldn't have been fighting the Nazis. Maybe we should have been fighting the commies. And so they kind of hatch a secret plan to form this thing called Operation Gladio, which is where all the forces that are still very much anti-communist, the CIA decides to give them funding to to liberate the Eastern Bloc from communism. And they end up teaming up with the Sicilian Mafia, the Freemasons, and the Vatican. So that'll be on our Substack, link in the description.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading more about it. There's that's the librarian is writing that. So, yeah. So today, chapter 9, is chapters 12 and 13. Chapter 12 is the policy of appeasement, 1931 to 1936. And chapter 13 is the disruption of Europe. And the disruption of Europe is like 37, 38, 39. So there's appeasement wrapped up in there. Not a lot of slides today. But it's for I don't know what to do.
I would like to put in the request for more slides though, for future episodes.
Yeah, the problem with the slides is either there's too many or not enough. The slides are broken.
Well, can't you go to the other mode? Hey, something happened.
My mouse is flicking around, but it's not. It's not on. I'm not on that slide. So. Oh, there. I don't understand. Okay. So there's this quote from Quigley that a progress, and I'm sort of paraphrasing a little bit here. Progress stripped men of structures that supported society for millennia. Without them, men turned to parties that offered them meaning and purpose. So the story of Europe from, the Renaissance progressively through, the Reformation was not a liberal movement. The Reformation was a reaction against the liberalizing of Roman Catholics, and then the French Revolution, the processes that go through there. You see the falling away, especially from the French Revolution onwards, of the structures that define men's lives. Aristotle says that you are your roles, and Sartre comes along and he goes, what happens if I take these layers away, these roles away? And he gets to nothing. And Aristotle knew that you'd get to nothing, and that would be bad. So you are your set of relationships that you have. You are your obligations. And Aristotle thinks that, these are important to us. And the modern, as I say with Sartre is like, yay, nothing, right? Like, and that's how you get existential dread. So these roles are taken away, and these roles are who we are. And you find yourself in the 20s and 30s, and you've been through the bloodiest war in history, fought in a way that was particularly brutal, in trenches, lobbing artillery shells at one another. There's the church is in decline. You have uppity women growing everywhere, and the roles that are available for men get reduced down to basically their jobs. And this is where we are today still, right? And so what one of the major appeals that the fascists have is that they offer men a sense of themselves, and a purpose, and they give them meaning, because you're not just like working in a factory. You're working in a factory for the glory of Germany. You're working in a factory for the glory of Italy. And this is a very powerful motivator for people that have lived through a lack of purpose for them. The Great Depression takes away a huge amount of activity in people's lives. They're vulnerable to these economic trends that are beyond their comprehension. They don't really understand why they're not able to buy food, and they're sort of caught in the machine, and the machine will, seize farms from people when it created the conditions in which they lost their farms in the first place. This narrative of the free market is kind of problematic because it's free on the surface, but beneath that surface, it's being heavily manipulated. And the problem is, you're never the one who's able to manipulate it. It's always these big actors who are milking you. And one of the things I keep trying to tell people that I talk to is, a chicken farmer farms chicken. A beef farmer farms beef. And the IRS farms you. We're being farmed. So these fascistic parties can offer a narrative to people who don't have anything, and it's one of the as the liberal world order is less and less able to offer economic benefits to Americans, to British people, etc., it will these people who are drugged by the ability to go out and buy clothes or cars will start to become more ethnocentric and more nationalistic. When America finally does collapse, I expect some things. By collapse, I mean retreat to its own shores and stops caring about what happens outside of its own shores. Watch Europe, because Europe is going to clean out a lot of the results of the global American empire. And it's gonna be a fun time. So I think this is we can see this coming to an extent, and I'm not for it or against it. I'm just trying to be objective and describe what I think's happening. So, what happens in this period from sort of 1931 onwards is a growing desire on the part of particularly three countries, um, Japan, Italy, and Germany, to assert themselves and to take their dues. Um, Japan is very interesting because in the First World War, it's an ally. And it's on the side of Britain and America, and of course, in the Second World War, it's not, and it flips. One of the reasons it flips is that the British negate allow the treaty of the alliance that they have with the Japanese to fall to what's the word expire, and they don't renew it because there's a sense the British have that the Americans and the Japanese are going to fight each other, and actually we want to be with the Americans, not the Japanese. I actually think this is a major strategic mistake on the British part. I think an alliance with Japan made much more sense if you look at the layout of the empire than it did with America. But what you have to remember is that the British elite by 1900 are already talking about how they can not bring America into the empire, how they can bring the empire into America. That's the Milner Group, that's Cecil Rhodes. And when we, in 2 or 3 chapters, when we get to the bit in Tragedy and Hope that deals with the Anglo-American establishment, I'll go back and talk about that in a little bit more depth. So Japan comes up. It's done really well in the First World War. It's growing. It's very good at value adding to the material that it gets. So it's importing, producing, and then exporting. They've got a workforce that's very dedicated and focused and cooperative. But they lack, as I say, raw materials. And so they look around. They had a war in, I believe, 1897 with China. They have the war with Russia in 1901, 1902. They have the First World War. And they really push into Manchuria in 1931. This turns into northern China. And what they're doing is they're trying to secure raw materials for further expansion later. China is kind of vulnerable. It is infiltrated by the USSR. It's this very fractious country. The USSR takes advantage of this, and they start supporting the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang does fairly well, and Chiang Kai-shek drops all pretenses of being a socialist. Although I believe the Kuomintang remains nominally socialist, but yeah, Chiang just doesn't care much about socialism once he's winning, and things are so bad internally with China that that when Japan actually invades China, Chiang doesn't go, well, we need to deal with this. He goes, okay, well, we'll do what we can, but I really, really want to beat Mao. They continue to fight Chinese communists, despite the Japanese invasion. As we said, Japanese, if you go back to the episode on the Buffer Fringe, Japan is controlled by industrial and political interests that are very concentrated. This is very wrapped up with the Army and the Navy. There's a low intensity struggle between the Army and the Navy. The Navy wants to expand, obviously, around the maritime into the Pacific. The Army wants to expand into Asia. And but what happens is, the problem with Japan is the military is able to act very much independently. So no one is able to really negotiate with the Japanese government because the Japanese government isn't able to do anything about the military. So there's like these efforts to stop the expansion into Manchuria, but it just keeps going because the Japanese government can't do anything about it even if it wanted to. Now what happens is Manchuria does give some resources to the Japanese economy, but it depletes in other areas more resources than it's giving. And Japan realizes, well, like what it needs is oil. So and one of the things that happens is the Americans cut off the oil supply to Japan. Japan knows this is coming. And before it knows this is coming, it's looking around for oil, and there's one place that is really appealing for its oil, which is the Dutch East Indies, which is now Indonesia. Japan assumes that if they go into Dutch East Indies, it will bring in American intervention because the Philippines are right there, and besides, America does not want a Pacific power that can compete with it. There's a book by a guy, can't remember his name. It's called Imperial Cruise, and in before the first, like around 1900, there's this idea that the Anglo-Saxon people start in North Germany. They go into England, they take England. Actually, you go back further. The Germanic peoples sweep out of the steppes. They take Germany, they take England. Eventually the English go to America, and there's this great push across America. And that in 1900, the idea is that we're going to complete the encirclement of the globe with the Germanic Anglo-Saxon peoples. And we're going to go back to where we originated. And there's this sort of expectation that there's going to be some sort of like American imperial activity in China into Central Asia. And that the Anglo-Saxon people are going to dominate this like latitude, and and unfortunately it's the brainchild of Americans, so stupid. But it's kind of, and there's this thing called there's the Imperial Cruise, and I believe it's Taft is the foreign secretary, and I think it's after Taft, the foreign secretary is what we have in the UK. And incidentally, we have a new foreign secretary today, and it's our old prime minister, David Cameron. I woke up today, and I went, "Am I having a stroke?" Because I opened the BBC and it said David Cameron is the foreign secretary. The Secretary of State in America. Taft is Secretary of State, and he goes and he takes this cruise across the Pacific, and they're looking at, one of the things that's happening is he's looking at these places that were taking the Spanish-American War, Guam, the Philippines, He goes to Japan, I think, and he goes, and America sees there's a faction in America that see the acquisition of these possessions as part of its like manifest destiny. Just we're going to keep pushing west until west is into the east. So the Japanese expect this. They've heard this sort of talk, and they realize that they have to do something, or they're going to not be able to act in a meaningful way later. But that's how they. But what to be taken from this is that expansion to Manchuria, and this sort of the strive for resources, and they're anticipating. We're not going to look at it today, but the sort of the anticipation of getting some ability to produce oil from the from the South China Sea sort of area. Italy goes through something kind of similar in the expansion. Italy is very much haunted by like the ghost of Rome, of the Roman Empire. Mussolini is constantly referring back to it. He's trying to be like a new Caesar, and he's trying to construct a new Roman Empire. Now, there's something really interesting where we end up in 1939. In 1931, you would not have thought that in 1939 Italy and Germany will be allied together. They do end up allied together for some interesting because Mussolini realizes the French and British are not really going to help him out, and this is triggered by. Renegade. I'm not gonna restart. I can't. It seems to be a little bit slow. It did catch up, but I can't restart. I don't want to. I feel like restarting the slides again is not worth it. It's just it's a bad night. All it says is Italy. You're not missing anything. And Mussolini does not want to be allied with Germany. He sees Germany as a competitor. Particularly a competitor over who's going to be the leader of the pack of formerly Austro-Hungarian Empire nations. So one of the things we'll see is that there's quite a lot of conflict over Austria and what happens with Austria, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So what happens is there's a little sort of axis that starts to form in the Balkans with Italy, Hungary, Austria, and Bulgaria versus what's known as the Little Entente, which is Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia. That's the beginning of Italy positioning itself. Italy delays the German seizure of Austria, but I will talk about that when we get to the bit about chapter 13. But what really kind of like causes quite a big fuss is that Mussolini goes into Ethiopia. If you'll remember, what happens is, excuse me. what happens is that Wilson at Versailles does this really like awful intervention with the Italians over is it Friuli, and the and the Italians leave negotiation out of disgust at Wilson's behavior. So they don't get anything when they don't get any sort of imperial possessions. This is used then by Mussolini as a way of going like, well, we want something. We want to be great. We want to be glorious. So you know what? We're going to take Ethiopia. Ethiopia largely because it's like the one place nearby that Italy could take because nobody else has it. And they don't and this causes quite a reaction. The British public, in particular, don't like this. It's they think it's not playing the game, and there was really like a real possibility that Italy could have made a really close working relationship with particularly Britain. But the British become very anti-Italy because of the invasion of Ethiopia. The government doesn't really care. It's the British people. But the government sort of sits on the fence, hoping for things to blow over. But in doing so, they sort of lose both opportunities, Quigley says. They get the resentment of both Italy and Ethiopia. So the other thing that comes up here is Quigley says it's not that Mussolini wanted Europe or wanted Ethiopia. He very specifically wanted a war. I think that if I remember correctly, he Quigley says at one point like there's this moment where the British like try to negotiate an ability for just to get the Ethiopians to surrender, and Mussolini refuses because he wants this martial glory. And then what happens is the war gets going. It's fairly short. Britain and France sort of half-heartedly place him. I'm gonna sneeze again in a minute. Ugh. Britain and France place these like embargoes on Italy, but not in any meaningful way. And so what happens is they don't actually weaken Italy. They just piss Italy off, and just as Italy is starting to sort of be hurt by these embargoes, the British and French go, we're pulling them off. And so what happens is Mussolini very much gets the point that he has no future in being allied to Britain. He's got to find a new ally, and who is there? Well, there's Hitler. So that's how Italy ends up sort of flipping over to the Axis. In Britain and France, there's a in France, you have the rise of a socialist government under Leon Blum. This causes a lot of problems. The Blum, there's this worry that Blum's going to make some sort of alliance with the Russians, and the British really don't want that to happen. The British see Stalin and the Soviets as the biggest threat in Europe. And we're going to tell you about this in a minute. the British are advocates of like this three block policy. You have like an Atlantic liberal bloc, you have a Central European fascist bloc, and then you have an Eastern communist bloc. And they don't want the communist bloc, but they just want to make it so that the fascist bloc does not attack the liberal bloc, but rather looks to the communist bloc to attack it. So they want to use Germany to attack the Soviets. They don't want France flipping over, so they make things difficult during the Blum government. But the other thing is that Britain feels very much guilty of about Versailles, and it recognizes that a lot of these countries are doing things that are a bit mean but justified, because they're great countries. Great countries are allowed to do things, but also we'll see with the Germans. A lot of people end up on the wrong side of borders, so it's very much sort of it's a difficult issue in Britain, and generally the upper classes, the elites, are fairly favorable to Germany, and they're sympathetic to it, and there's this competition. Excuse me. There's some competition between like different sets. Like there's the Astor set and the Cliveden set, and the Astor set is, I believe the Astor set's pro-Germany and the Cliveden set's anti-Germany. But you have guys like Lionel Curtis, who we'll talk about in future episodes. Very pro-German, very pro-Germany reasserting itself. Doesn't want another war, but he just thinks things have been too hard on Germany. And then you have the Spanish Civil War, and the Spanish Civil War is the sort of beta testing for the Second World War. Quigley is, I think, far, far, far too positive about the Republicans and far too negative about the Spanish, or the nationalists. The Republicans were brutal, and if the Republicans had won, it would not have been nice, liberal centrists that won. It would have been the Marxists, despite what Quigley says. So, what is important about the Spanish Civil War is the way that the international community negotiates these sorts of positions and then kind of ignores them. And what ends up happening is that the nationalists get lots of support that they shouldn't be getting, and the Republicans don't get lots of support that they should be getting. There's a big intervention with Italians. A lot of Italians go over. There's the Condor Legion, which is the German volunteer force that goes over there. And then on the flip side, there's a lot of Russian support there, although Quigley sort of downplays this Russian support. I think now the scholarship would make it appear that there was more Russian support there than Quigley was aware of. And the and of one of the things that's interesting, and one of the reasons why. Sorry, I can't stop yawning, Renegade. I don't know why. I'm tired tonight. I live with this terrible guy. He's terrible. He doesn't. I'm not going to go into it. He's been ruining my life lately. And the I can't remember what I was saying. That's an inside joke for somebody in the call in the stream. Oh, right. So one of the positive things is that the nationalists are very much able to. The different factions are very much able to work together, and the Republicans always have this very difficult working relationship between all of them. The Marxists show up, the Marxists being supported by the Soviets, show up with great equipment, and the condition to, like, they don't share any of the equipment, or like the condition to get the equipment is that the Marxists are going to lead the operation. And what they're trying to do is, the USSR is trying to use Spanish Marxists as a way of taking control of the conflict and ensuring that Spain becomes a communist state at the end of the war. The anarchists are a big faction in Spain. They don't like the Marxists. There's quite a lot of infighting between the two groups, and then you've got like just regular like center left Republicans trying to work with these two factions who hate each other. It's a very difficult situation for the Republicans, and it's more than just material and like going this way and that way. The nationalists have a backdoor through Portugal. Portugal never like properly adheres to what it agreed to. They very much are on the side of the nationalists, and I think honestly, I have to disagree with Quigley here, right? I think the good guys did win in the Spanish Civil War. I don't think the Republicans were the good guys, and I think I'm pretty happy about that result. I'm pretty happy that the side that was not killing priests and nuns won. So, yeah. That is chapter 12. It quickly finishes on the Spanish Civil War. I highly recommend looking into the Spanish Civil War. I quite enjoy these little peripheral conflicts that occur in the 20th century. The Russian-Japanese War is one of them. The Spanish Civil War is one of them. These little stories on the fringes of like great powers, and like the intervention of great powers in those places. Africa is another one in the Cold War. The meddling of Soviets and CIA in Africa in the post-Second World War. One of the few things that the CIA and the KGB ever agreed on was ruining Africa for ruining Rhodesia and ruining South Africa, which are now no longer functioning countries because of CIA and KGB cooperation. So there's lots of interesting little conflicts that you never hear about. You always hear about First World War, Second World War. And the Spanish Civil War is one of those ones that's very interesting that I don't think gets the airtime. I'm switching slides now, so here's what I'm going to do. I am going to very quickly restart, and I'm just going to load up the full slide so that you can see what I'm talking about. Oh, now my cursor's gone again. There we go. Okay. Jeff, are you there? Do you have any
Yeah. For the slides, it's actually very smooth when you're not doing the full screen mode. So
I don't know what to do with that information.
you can just leave it in the non-full screen mode.
Oh, I know what I could do. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, just leave it there. We can see it.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is crop the OBS window so that it is on.
You really want to get the full screen?
Yeah, I think it looks better, but okay. Since we're where we are,
Yeah.
since we've been through all of this, so the next chapter is a bit more the immediate lead up to the Second World War. Austria is a problem. It's in a weird position. It's the former seat of a large empire, so it's got a sense of itself that is quite glorious, quite important, but its position no longer matches its sense of itself. So what does it want to do? It wants to join Germany. Now, it's controlled by nationalists, but not Nazis. And the nationalists are very much on the side of Mussolini. Mussolini threatens. There's this point where where Hitler's getting close to just seizing Austria, and he backs down because Mussolini says, if the Germans go in, he's going to go in to stop the Germans. There's like, this is one of the places you see that like why the Germans aren't fascists really. I've been calling them fascists, but they're not really. There's the fascists are known as the Heimwehr, which is the home guard, and there's Heimwehr and Nazis in Germany, in Austria, and they're both opposed to one another. But eventually Hitler does just sort of walk in and take it. Brings Austria in, and this is after Italy's been driven into the German camp, so you no longer have to worry about that. Czechoslovakia is in an impossible situation. You can see with the Balkans why the Austro-Hungarian Empire was probably like the best option available, because in England you do not have ethnic groups in weird little pockets scattered around. You just have the English. You have these annoying Welsh and Scots and Irish who move over to the cities, but it's all English. Same with France. Pretty much everybody's French except for some eastern bits where there's some small Italian or German populations, uh, and the in Czechoslovakia you do not have that. Throughout the Balkans, you do not have that. You have in Czechoslovakia, you have Germans, you have Czechs, you have Slovaks, you have Ruthenians, you have Hungarians, you have Polish, and they're sort of spread out. They're not in nice places. One of the big complaints, even today, is for the Hungarians is the Treaty of Trianon. Hungary loses a lot of its land to various neighbors, and the Hungarians still bitch about this. But the problem is that those were not really Hungary in the way that, like, you couldn't let them stay with Hungary because they had other peoples in them that were the majority. But for the Czechs in the east, you have this this group, the Sudetenland Germans, and the problem is that the Sudetenland Germans very much want to be part of Germany. The problem is they're on the wrong side of some mountains. So if Germany is given the Sudeten Germans, Czechoslovakia is not going to have any means to defend itself from Germany because it's given up its defensive position with the mountains to the Germans. Now, one of the problems that Czechoslovakia also is going for is that it's seen as being dangerously close to Russia. It has an alliance with Russia, and so and at the same time, the French are talking very sympathetically because they have Leon Blum, and there's this worry that there's this French, Czech, Russian axis that could form, and Britain doesn't want that. And so Hitler starts agitating. Hitler wants a war. Quigley says this. Hitler wants a war. And he gets frustrated when everybody keeps conceding to him because he really wants a war. And what happens is the Germans, you have Munich, and the Germans are given the Sudetenland. France is told by Britain that if France agitates for a war over Czechoslovakia, it is more than welcome to do that, but it can't expect the British to help it. If France gets attacked by Germany, however, the British will help. The British are again riding this problem of public opinion. Public opinion is very much on the side of Czechoslovakia, whereas the British elite don't really care. There's this sort of realization that these people probably do belong in some sort of imperial system. September, October 1938, Hitler is given the Sudetenland, and then in March 1939, he just takes all of Czechoslovakia. But what Quigley says is that the problem here, the tragedy here, is that the Czechoslovakians at the time probably had a stronger army than the Germans, and they could have fought the Germans off if they had tried, but their hands were tied by the British in particular, preventing them from fighting. The British are making these coercive statements, position to the Czechoslovakians, and the Czechoslovakians backed down. Um, um, Now, the Chamberlain, though, thought that Germany was going to just wreck the Czechoslovakians. So there's probably that's why. Now I've talked about it in previous episodes. And now what? One of the most popular beliefs is that Chamberlain thought that war was inevitable with Germany, and he's buying time for British rearmament. Quigley doesn't know that. Quigley doesn't talk about that. Whether or not it would have been better for the British to intervene with what they had in 1938 rather than a year later in 1939 with a strong Czechoslovakian military behind them is, a big hypothetical. What I will say is that the Germans really benefit militarily from taking the Czechoslovakian industry, and they get a lot of tanks from Czechoslovakia. There's a the Germans call it the Panzer 38, and they get a number of these P-38s, and they use them in the early part of the Second World War, particularly in Poland. And then what happens is, whenever you see in and these are Czechoslovakian tanks, right? The P-38s, they just take them from Czechoslovakia. And whenever you see anything in a German Panzer that's got 38 in its designation, it's using the chassis of this tank, and they're used all over. There's a particularly tank destroyer, the Jagdpanzer 38. There's the Martyr 38 is another one. There's I believe there's an anti-aircraft variant. So this chassis and the ability to produce this chassis are very significant for Germany's war effort.
But given that Chamberlain thought that war with Germany was inevitable, wouldn't it have been better if he had told the Czechs to fight the Germans first?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. I don't know. Maybe he didn't think it was inevitable. Maybe he thought it was likely, but he could land the plane if the right things happened. He also thought that the Czechs were just going to get destroyed, so that he probably thought there's no point in them putting up any resistance. It'll be suicide. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's really dealt with Quigley's idea that the Czechs could have won or done very well, and that therefore they should have resisted. That's a good question. I don't know. As I said, the British hope for this sort of 3-block environment to emerge, and that there'll be stability there. They're hoping that something can be figured out between Germany and Poland. Now, Poland, there's Germany has a little enclave in East Prussia and Königsberg, but it doesn't have a land bridge to East Prussia. So it's got to either ship everything by boat or go through Poland. And it needs Poland to cooperate. Poland is not interested in cooperating because it sort of sees the posturing of Hitler and the desire for him to get bits and pieces. Poland's not innocent though. There's massive amounts of ethnic cleansing of Germans in Poland. And the other thing that happens is when in March of 39, when Germany takes all of Czechoslovakia, the Poles take a little bit of Czechoslovakia too. So the Poles have been quite assertive in the interwar period. They piss off all of their neighbors. They're not some poor little, they're not Kuwait just waking up one day and having like Iraqi tanks up and down the street. They're playing the game as much as anybody else. Now, I don't get the sense that Hitler really wanted Poland in the same way that he wanted the Sudetenland or Austria. What he wanted was an ability to get the Russians. Had they been able to negotiate some, and had the Poles been prepared to negotiate a land bridge, the Germans wanted a 1 kilometer wide corridor through Poland that they could ship, that they could build a highway into East Prussia. They had, I believe, they quite early negotiated with Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia the ability to move through those countries in the event of a war with the Soviet Union. And those countries, of course, know exactly what they're dealing with the Soviet Union. And what Germany also really wants is the city of Danzig. So, and Danzig is German. It's now the city of Gdansk, and that's also left out. But Danzig is this League of Nations city. It's like economically within the borders of Poland, but it's administered by a League of Nations mandate. And what we get is the Poles just refusing. They've seen what happens, and Hitler starts prepping the narrative for invading Poland. He has a number of like false flags sort of starting. He has prisoners at a concentration camp, and there's a difference between a concentration camp and a death camp. A concentration camp is not, they're not nice, but they're not death camps, right? These are not Jews. These are more like political prisoners. They dress these or criminals, right? And they dress them in German uniforms, and then they shoot them, and they plant their bodies at the border with Poland, and they say the Poles have been killing our border guards. And then there's the Reichstag fire, and Hitler is prepping the narrative, and he wants a war. And that's where we are. This is how these things come together. And again, Throughout this, the British are dealing with this problem of what the government wants and what the public wants, what the public thinks, and they're riding this tiger, and they don't want to give more up than they have to appease the public. But what's going to happen is Hitler's going to go into Germany, and at this point, everybody knows or Hitler goes into Poland, and everybody knows there is no more negotiating. We're going to war, because if we don't stop in Poland, who knows what will be next. And of course, what have the Germans done? They've realized that the liberal Europe is not going to be looked the other way, so they've negotiated this treaty with the Russians. The Russians and the Germans are going to divide Poland between them. People forget that, like a week or two after the German invasion, the Russians go into the east of Poland and take about a third of eastern Poland. And there's not going to be a Poland for very long.
Was that just an opportunistic invasion by Russia?
Well, no, they negotiated it with the Germans. The Germans only advanced so far. It was opportunistic insofar as the Russians let the Germans do all the fighting. And then the Russians do the murder in the Kaliningrad, is it the something forest. They get a whole bunch of Polish army officers and priests and leaders of Poland, and they just shoot them all and bury them in this forest in eastern Poland. So they're engaged in they're doing bad stuff too. But there's some fighting that goes on. There's an interesting sort of story about there's this sort of trip that the Polish guys who get away take through Romania and then down into Turkey and over to Britain via little hops and skips here and there. And the Free Polish will be a fairly significant force operating under British command. The guys who got out, they operate as part of British military structures. Montgomery's 8th Army has Free Polish units in it in North Africa. So the Polish make a significant contribution once they get equipment back in their hands. I don't know how many actually get to Britain, but they're fighting, and that's what I got for today. And then next week we're gonna look at the Second World War, chapters 14 and 15, and then we've got 5 more chapters. So I think at most we've got 6 episodes left. Do we got any questions?
Do you know who Gregory Leibowitz is?
Yes, that's a joke.
Okay. Well, I explain.
I was talking about my horrible roommate, and Zoomer is my roommate, so I just
okay.
poking fun at him. And then Gregory Leibowitz is a reference to that Norm Macdonald joke where it's a reference to a Norm Macdonald joke.
Okay.
Anyway.
All right. There's a couple questions in chat now. Question: what's the difference between the British public opinion then versus current thing TM now from Renegade?
Uh
Like, does British public opinion always lean a certain way? I guess is the question.
I think it's sort of like there's quite a affection for the underdog.
Yeah.
So I think there's a certain sense of like amongst most Brits, there's a sense of like, yeah, Israel probably is like the good guy, but they're not like playing the game fair, and we have this sort of like we kind of like the Palestinians because of like their they're the little guys, and come on, you can't it's that play fair thing that we talked about in comparison to the Germans, right? Like it's you've got to play the game fair. You've got to play, and you've got to be fair, importantly, when no one's looking. The moment when it doesn't matter if you play fair when everybody's looking at you, because of course it's when you're supposed to play fair. The real mark of like a British sense of fair play is that fair play needs to happen when no one's looking. And
there's this kind of secular humanist talking point going around right now about imagine if you were designing the Matrix, what kind of political system would you put in if you didn't know which like socioeconomic class you would be put into once you entered the Matrix. So they're always thinking this kind of scenario where imagine if you were unlucky enough to be born as the underdog.
Yeah, okay. What would I want? I probably would want. I probably would want Britain. I want. The ideal of Britain, right? Which is older than you might think. The ideal of England. Probably something like England circa 1600s. The rights and close one there. What was that? Close what? The thing about England, it really is true that like the little guy is everyone is a noble in England. All English people have the rights of continental nobility. So there's this sort of sense of like, an English farmer is the equivalent of a French duke. There's some wonderful accounts of. I think he's a Venetian diplomat, and he goes to England in like the 1600s or 1700s. I think it's the 1600s, and he's walking around, and he's getting more and more frustrated because the English use English to be like a to just mean good, and if a man is particularly good looking, they say he looks English, and so people would come up to this Venetian and go, "Oh, you look very English," and he goes, "What do you mean?" They go, "Well, you're handsome," and he gets more and more frustrated, and there's this exchange he has where he tries to convince the English that Italian wine is better than English wine, and they won't believe him. And he says like he's never met any people that just like simply won't believe him just based upon the fact that English wine's English, so therefore it must be better than anything else. And that sort of that sense pervades, I think, England up until recently. And in part of that is part, and wrapped up with that is this idea of like, yeah, everything's better here. In part because it is better here. In part because we have a system of which an English yeoman has more rights than a French noble. The French king can do more to the French nobility than the English king can do to an English peasant. He needs justification. He needs to justify what he's doing. And one of the things that causes the English Civil Wars, that there's a lot of public sentiment against the king going, because he started trying to seize the commons and giving village commons to his guys, and taking them, and it's the enclosure movement. And it's one of the reasons why like Marxists look towards Oliver Cromwell as sort of like, oh, one of our guys, but also, you know, it's a weird group of people that look towards Oliver Cromwell as sort of their symbol. But yeah, it's.
Would you say that there's a bit of reciprocity there, where because you said that the English king can't do as much to his peasants as the French king can do to his? Would it work the other way around as well, where the English peasant is less likely to behead his king than the French peasant is to his king?
Yes, but the irony is that we behead an English king 100 years before the French had their king. 140 years before. But the problem is that I lean parliamentarian, but I will genuinely say that Charles II or Charles I deserved to have his head cut off more than Louis XVI. Whether or not he actually deserved to have his head cut off, that's one thing. But Louis XVI genuinely did nothing to deserve it. Charles I, he kept trying to escape, and then he made this treaty with the Scots and said, if you give me an army and come beat the English, I'll do all this stuff for you guys. And that was while he was in captivity under Cromwell, or under the parliamentarians. And the parliamentarians went, you're a traitor to England. You're trying to betray England to the worst people on earth, the Scots. We can't have that. And that's really why he gets his head cut off. And in some ways, if you want to take this view of like the great man of history, right? The great man of history makes things happen. Charles I is not a great man. Charles I is a bumbler. He is not some Napoleon who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's a bungler, and he very much makes the bed that he lies in. I wouldn't have beheaded him myself, but it's when you dig into it becomes a lot more obvious. But I think it's more like they are closer to one another than they are in France. And when something goes bad in England, there's less of a desire to like change the status quo. and more just like keep on going, and um, but like there's enough sort of civic involvement and avenues for participation, but government's still very much in the hands of the elite. But the thing is that it's never really the king who's in control. He tries to be in control, but from 1688 onwards, it's very much really Parliament that's calling the shots.
One final question here from Blotto. Did you say that Quigley distinguishes between National Socialists and fascists?
Well, not particularly in any sort of like ideological sense, but he does make a distinction in a few areas between, in a country like Austria, you have Nazis and fascists fighting one another. The Nazis are Nazis, and the fascists are called the Heimwehr. And the Heimwehr are like Catholic fascist uh, um, guys who are not National Socialist. There's a difference if you go deep enough into this, and I can't remember really what the good distinction between the two are, but yeah, there's a distinction, and Quigley does kind of make it, but not in a ideological sense, more just like factional opposition. But that distinction breaks down once Italy, as the leader of like fascist Europe, is safely under the Germans. So
Okay.
cool. So next week, or next episode, which I think is Wednesday, we'll do the Second World War.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
All
I
right.
think, yeah, a lot of people get the sense like finally.
Uh, well, I
That's
don't think it's like finally, like I think the Second World War is not super interesting for
mm,
um, from Quigley's point of view.
okay.
There's some like I did for the First World War. I'm not gonna really talk a lot about like sequential military campaigns. I'm just gonna pull out I'm gonna be talking about two things in particular, that I can think of at the moment. One is the way in which American production just booms, and the other is the way that the pluralist economy, aka managerialism, uh, is developed into a science via the British use of development of the field of operational research. And the field of operational research is one that is developed to go, how can we fight this war as efficiently as possible? And there's lots of guys, lots of very smart guys that got pulled into that project. I only found out a few days ago, and I put it in our chat, Jeff, that Freeman Dyson, who was quite a accomplished physicist, was in operational research when during the war. He got pulled out of Oxford or Cambridge to go work in it. And if you ever heard of Dyson space or a Dyson sphere, he's the guy that developed the idea of a Dyson sphere.
Mhm.
So
Does it have anything to do with the vacuum cleaner brand?
no, I don't think it does. I don't know who that guy
Okay.
is. I think that might be
Okay.
like a nephew or something. It's not his son. I don't think he has one son, and that's not him. I don't think. Anyway, next week or next whenever it is next time.
This Wednesday potentially.
Yeah. And and if you guys have any questions, put them down, and we see them. If you can't watch this live, we'll try and get to your questions at the beginning of next episode.
Rifle by your side as the outro.
Oh, if you want.
Yeah.
Let's have a look here. I wasn't ready for this.
They'll look high and they'll look low.
They'll look everywhere we go.
But when the sinners find us, we won't hide. They'll come loud and they'll come fast.
But we shoot first and we can last.
Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. So we'll take a stand, 'cause we must protect our land. Keep your rifle by your side.
They'll come day and they'll come night. They'll have our children in their sights. But if they don't have faith, their eyes are blind.
They can scream and they can shout, but they can never smoke us out. Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When we hear the voice, we know we have no other choice. Keep your rifle by your side. They'll have bombs and they'll have tanks, 'cause they got money in their banks. But we won't fall as long as we can fight.
They'll go on to preach their hate, but they won't get past the gate.
Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side. Keep my rifle by my side. Keep your rifle.